Hello, everyone, and welcome to the RV show. My name is Vinay.
And my name is Rohan.
So, today we're going to be talking about the election, as just in 2 days. Last election, we were in a position that feels really similar to today. We feel like Trump's opponent, which was then Hillary Clinton and now Joe Biden, we feel like they're in the pole position and should win the upcoming election. However, as we know, last election was won by Trump and not Clinton. First, we can discuss just how accurate these polls are. So obviously, last election cycle, they did not predict the result correctly. As you may expect, Biden has a higher probability of winning this election than Hillary did, by looking at most polls from all various sources such as 538, the New York Times, and the US Times. Last election, most sources that set 538 had Hillary winning in more than 80% of the time using their model. However, we can see clear flaws in their system. They looked at each state as a separate race, and their logic was, if Trump has a 35% chance of winning Pennsylvania, 40% chance of winning North Carolina, etc., for all the swing states, then it would add up to only an X% chance that Trump gets the required battleground states. However, that polling system didn't work too well, and 538 had a more logical approach. And even though they still predicted the wrong result, they were much more accurate, as they said if the polls are off and say Trump wins his 40% probability in North Carolina, then it's very possible and almost likely that other swing states could also follow the same trend. So Ron, what do you think about the accuracy of polling, and how do you think it is accurate or not?
Right. Well, I think we never really know until election day and until like the votes are actually counted. Um, you know, Empirically, we know that like the polls weeks before the election never dictate what actually happens in the election. Especially like in the last election between Trump and Hillary, like even though Hillary had like a pretty like significant lead, Trump was able to like cover that easily within like a couple of days before election day.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't think like basing your opinions off polls is that great of an idea. Um, I wouldn't say they're like inaccurate. Or in my opinion, I don't think they're super inaccurate. The way I'll view it is that Trump was able to close the gap that he had against Hillary as election day approached. Um, and I guess like in this election, what we have to be aware of is that like even right now, we can see Trump is already closing gaps in the polls.
Mhm.
One example is in Florida. Um, it's gotten a lot closer because Trump has gained like a lot of support from um, Latinos in Florida.
Mhm.
Whereas Biden has a lot of support from like senior citizens in Florida, and so it's going to be interesting to see um, like how that goes together. But like you can see that like Trump is closing gaps in a lot of states, and I think recently, like on his campaign trail, he's making a push in the Midwest because he knows that how important that is, especially the swing states. So
Yeah, that's a good point. The gap has really been closing down recently. So what do you think about like the specific logic used behind each poll? Like we saw that most models go state by state, saying this state has a 30% chance, 40% chance, etc. But then other models such as 538 say that if one swing state goes, say, Trump's way, then it's possible that that trend follows in other swing states. So what do you think should be the logic used in polling? And what would you change about the current polling system if you were to change anything?
right, well, I- like logically, when I look at it, it seems like going state by state works,
Mhm.
or not works. Sounds better, especially because like I can't logically see how one person votes in like one state will affect the voting in another state. Um,
Mhm.
but 538 I guess is basing off general voting trends. So
Yeah,
if the Midwest is like if certain states are going to vote for Trump, then they can generally predict that other states who share similar values will vote for Trump. Um,
exactly.
and that seems like a pretty like reasonable way to do it too. Like I'm not that qualified to say like which one's right and which one's wrong. I'm no
Yeah.
statistician. Um, but I can see merits at both.
Okay. I guess that makes sense. I do think that the logic still needs to be developed properly because there's many like
Right.
flaws in the current system. Like I think I
Yeah,
was reading
definitely.
that in Wisconsin they got it wrong last time because they only looked at college. The majority of the people that they polled were college graduates, for example, and many of like the younger college graduates tend to vote Democratic, but then they didn't um, so they didn't use the proper proportion of saying, okay, we're gonna have say 50% college graduates and 50% non-college graduates. They looked at it in an inaccurate proportion to the actual state population, and that caused their prediction to be quite wrong because they didn't properly account for the amount of college graduates that would vote one way or the other. So I guess in that sense, that they still need to um, base their polls and try and extrapolate them based off the proportions of amount of people with a certain value or a certain characteristic because they tend to share the same values and tend to vote for the same people. But I do think that the logic currently is pretty good as it is.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I think let's move on to the next story, which will be more specifically about um, the polls for this election,
Mhm.
um, and looking at our confidence in Biden. So while we have said that like caution is necessary about trying to decide the polls, Biden on October 28th, the most recent poll from 538 that we could find said that Biden's current lead is larger than Clinton's at any time in her campaign. In addition, Biden's big lead remains just a week away from the election. However, or in our case, a couple of days. However, in polls last election cycle, we can see the polls slightly dropping from Clinton, traveling from 85 to 75%. However, it was still a downward trend. Adding on to that, on the eve of the last election night, Clinton only had a 3 point lead, whereas Biden, a week away from the election, has an 8.6 point lead in the polls. There have been new fixes or implementations for more accurate results, like trying to weigh different factors like college education onto their polls. However, Biden still maintains this lead. This lead seems too big right now to be overcome by a small, plausible polling error. However, if the lead shrinks a bit, it becomes very possible and likely that it's another close election. Vinay, your thoughts on all this information? Do you feel comfortable thinking that Biden will win because of this large lead that he has, even compared to Hillary last time?
Well, I was really, really confident in Hillary winning last year. And I guess seeing that Trump won is always it's gonna be like a mental roadblock in me trying to think that a certain candidate is a lock before election day itself. So in that way, I don't have full confidence. However, seeing that Biden's lead is so much more significantly larger than Clinton was just 4 years ago, I do think that Biden has a higher probability of winning this election than Clinton did last election cycle.
Definitely. Um, I guess the way I look at it is Trump is a very good businessman and he knows how to sway voters.
Mhm.
Um, and near the end, he knows how to like spin a great story in order to get more voters. A good example is this has been like going all over social media because the Trump administration claimed stopping the coronavirus pandemic as a accomplishment of his.
Hmm.
Um, and like obviously like the US like we just hit like a like single day death like high point.
Yeah,
So obviously it's not been mitigated. Um, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see like we're only like 2 days away now from election day
mhm.
at the time of us recording this, and like it's going to be really interesting to see how like initially the votes look, um, and like over time like who will actually win, because I think the polls are definitely not the way to like look at when you're deciding an election.
I think that polls are a good predictive um, tool, But I don't think that you can kind of like say that they're for sure going to be correct in the upcoming election. However, I do think that they are a good like measuring point of seeing just how close this election may be. Because
Right,
even
but
though
I mean, as you get closer to election day, like I really don't think that looking at the polls should be like what like how you predict whether like Biden is going to win or not. I think like quite simply like there's a chance that like a lot of people who took the poll don't actually vote or they change their mind like on election day or something like that. Um, it
I
just
mean,
doesn't
many
feel like
people
like
have
like maybe
voted
like
before election day.
right like but like early on like it makes sense, right? But like the week before the election, like those things could change like really fast.
Hmm. Well, I agree, but I still think that this, like looking at just how, because if you look at it, all the polls last year, even though they said Hillary has a really high percentage of really high probability of winning that election, I do think it was despite the fact that they had minute errors in the way that they're calculating, for example, college graduates, like I said. Um, but I think that like there was only like small differences in the swing states, and they just got a lot of those swing states wrong. But I do think that this year, like accounting for the possibility that the swing state goes one way, then it will continue to go that way, and many other swing states. I do think that polls are a pretty good way of predicting the election, not necessarily being right about the outcome. But I don't think there's going to be too much movement on election day that would say push Trump over. I mean,
Right.
I do think that could push Trump over the line, but I don't think he could cover like a 5% deficit if he were to just on election day itself.
Yeah. I mean I see your logic. I guess I slightly disagree with that. Um 5% still isn't enough, especially like knowing what Trump has done in the past. And then also, um, like when you think about it, if it gets like to a close like election, then Trump can challenge like the vote in certain states.
That's true. Yeah.
Um, and who knows what can happen there. And I guess like it speaks to like Trump's like quote like fan base, I guess, because like like hundreds of economists like denounced him and endorsed Biden, like the New England Journal of Medicine endorsed Biden, like
Mhm.
so many like major players have it like gone said that you should vote for Biden, and yet Trump is still extremely competitive in this election.
I mean, he should be competitive, but according to the polls, he's not, which is my whole point. That even though he likely still will be competitive in this election, I
Right.
don't think that's going to be um, as close as you're thinking it's going to be,
Right.
just
Yeah, we'll
based off
see
the
about
poll
that. Yeah,
itself.
we'll see also because Biden has been making pushes in a lot of states that Trump historically has won. So
Yeah. Okay,
cool.
so I guess if we're done discussing this, then we can go on to our next segment, which is the W segment. So the first story that we have today is that a woman who was in labor giving birth to a child stopped to vote in Florida on her way to the hospital. So she said that she wanted to vote before she gives birth. What would you rate this story on a scale of weird to wacky?
So you're saying the woman while in labor stopped at a polling place?
Yes.
You know what? I'm gonna give that a witty.
Witty.
This whole pandemic is going around. You're trying to minimize how many times you go out of the house. So it's the smart play. Like when you're trying to run an errand, when you're on the way to the hospital, get other things done, like voting.
I mean, while you're in labor, wouldn't you think, okay, first I go to the hospital, give birth, and then come back and vote?
It's a distraction. It's a distraction.
Hmm. Okay.
Listen, won't it make you happy? Like you're in labor, but at least I got my vote in for Joe Biden or for Donald Trump.
I think we have slightly different viewpoints on that. Okay,
Okay.
so the next story that we have is that a Florida man found a $1 million lottery ticket just lying on his floor. It was unscratched while he was cleaning his house. So, what do you rate this story?
Wow. You know what I'm giving that? I'm giving that a wealthy.
Well, if he
A
did.
$1 million lottery
Yes,
ticket
he cashed it out
o-
for $720,000.
on the floor.
It was just on the
Wow.
floor in
You know what?
his
I
house
wish
as
I
he's
could
cleaning.
have that kind of luck. To
Yeah.
like find $1 million just sitting on the floor of my house,
Mhm.
if only.
So the next story is one that we might be able to relate to a tiny bit, where the middle school teacher, his Wi-Fi went out at his home, and when he went to school over there, their Wi-Fi was also out. So he taught his wrestling team while using the internet from Starbucks. So what do you rate this story?
How did he teach the wrestling team? Like, was he like,
It
did
was
he
like
like
a virtual, like
clear
he
up the
was.
tables at Starbucks and like do some like chokeholds on the ground or something?
No, it was virtual because obviously you're not allowed to meet in person. So you have like virtual practices where people are at home, kind of like how we, for example, take
Well, like,
a.
what kind of stuff did he do? You think?
I mean, he organized some like workouts, like he would watch and monitor the progress of many of his students, like just through Zoom, where he just see,
Interesting.
okay, this is what you're doing. Here are some drills that you should walk through, and then they had their videos on so he could teach them.
Interesting. Okay, so you know what? I'm gonna give that a week.
Ooh.
Not because they're weak, but because now that they won't get to do in-person wrestling, if you think about it, when they go back in person and they finally get to do wrestling, and this applies to like all sports, imagine how low the quality is going to be.
Well, so one thing is like I was reading that two people from the wrestling team are siblings, so they'd be like practicing on each other.
Oh, that's cool.
So like while it doesn't apply for all students, there were
True,
still ways
true.
for students to be together.
Yeah, and I mean, it's great that like, I mean, it's great that the coach was able to find like a place that had solid Wi-Fi that he could like have practices. So
Okay, so our next story is that Netherlands researchers have 3D printed the world's smallest boat, and it was just 30 micrometers in length, and it floats perfectly.
world's smallest boat.
Yeah, just for like just so you know how small it is, the boat is about 1/3 of the thickness of just one strand of your hair.
Oh, I mean, obviously it's gonna float if it's so small.
But it's
You
like
know
a
what?
perfectly looking boat that was made by them.
I'm giving that a wonky. That's a wonky right there, Vinay. That's weird. They made the world's smallest boat and it floats perfectly. I mean, to be fair, I feel like anything that small could
Yeah,
float.
true.
Like
But just
I
they
maybe
3D
it's all
printed it
about like the
perfectly down.
symmetry or something.
They 3D printed like the smallest design possible.
That's
For me, that
cool because I didn't know 3D I didn't know 3D printers could get that small.
yeah, I completely agree. Okay, so I think this wraps it up for today's W segment. Obviously, in just 2 days, we're going to be having the election, so we'll be watching the results of that.
Yep. Um, Obviously the next episode or the next segment is going to be about the election. Hopefully the votes have been counted, but really no one is going to know because it could take weeks and weeks to count the votes, knowing that there's so many mail-in ballots this year. And just make sure to vote if you still haven't yet. Make sure you stay active in the election and you really keep track of everything.
Okay, we'll see you next week.
What's up, everyone? Rohan here from the RV Show. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure you like the video and subscribe to stay updated on all of our new content. Also, if you are looking for past episodes, check out our YouTube playlist.